So I've already kind of told this story. Thanks to coincidence and circumstance, the only two Mega Man games I owned for about 1.5 to 2 years there were Mega Man 7 and Mega Man X3. My mother had made me sell all of the NES games I owned, which I'm still upset at her about to this very day. I actually complained about that to her when I started rebuying my NES collection. I was like, hey, Mom, you remember those games you made me sell for like $2 each? Yeah, it cost me $30 this time. Or a lot more than 30 in some cases. But anyways, she's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Anyways, but because I'd already sold off the NES classics and because I couldn't get a hold of, anything else, X1 or X2, I had 7 and X3. What's really funny about this, so some of you probably remember this, buying physical video games was kind of hard to do for periods of time there because we didn't really have game stores. You had like Toys R Us or sometimes rental places would sell. That's actually where this copy came from. You can kind of still see the glue on the edge there. That's from the Blockbuster sticker. I specifically got this at a Blockbuster when they were getting rid of all of their SNES things. It was like $15 or something. I just jumped on that. The irony here, by the way, if you don't know this, is this was a limited print run, as was X2. Getting a hold of SNES copies of these games became harder and harder as time went on because, well, they only made so many of them. So, I got lucky and happened to get that one. So I replayed Mega Man 7 and Mega Man X3 quite a bit. Both games reviewed quite poorly when gone through with analysis mode. And I'm not sure what else to say about that other than, wow, that coincidence. I mean, here's the thing. For those of you not aware, the way the golden number works is that 0 is total neutral. It's not really great, but it's just right in the middle. Anything in the negatives is a net negative. Anything in the positives is a net positive. That's how that system works in a nutshell. So, this game got a 6.38. It's not bad. It's fine. Several people in chat said that. Mega Man X3 is a fine game. It's just not really that great or good or excellent or none of the other things that I could be using to mention this. Someone in chat also mentioned, and this is true, that Mega Man X1 scored literally 10 times better than this for perspective. But it's still net positive, and I can still see why I enjoyed it back in the day, because there is still some decent stuff here, but wow. So why is it that both Mega Man 7 and this had issues? Well, there's some behind-the-scenes reasons we could go into, but honestly, I think that's a discussion better saved for when we get to X6, and that'll dovetail into X7, because it's the same issue that just kind of caused both problems there. But for now, what I want to discuss is the company. Now, there's this company, and I already forgot the name, but don't worry, I actually wrote it down this time. Minakuchi Engineering are the people who actually developed this game. If you've never heard of them, don't worry. Most people probably haven't. They were a subsidiary kind of a corporation underneath... A development team underneath Capcom. They made the Game Boy Mega Man games. The ones that are actually separate games and are their own thing. That, to me, makes perfect sense, and pretty much explains everything wrong with this game. On the one hand, they obviously tried stuff, which was something they did with the Game Boy games. We've got the chips, so this is actually a really cool feature. You've got these 4 chips. Each one is a significant upgrade. You can only pick one. And it tells you this. You pick one, and you lock yourselves out of the others, right? So you have to kind of pick and choose. That's kind of a cool system. And I do kind of like that idea. Or you could go all the way to the end of the game and get everything else, and then get the Hyper Chip, which gives you all 4. Which would have been a lot cooler if there was some kind of New Game Plus or something similar, which allowed you to experience that through the whole game, because by the time you get to the Doppler stages, it's not really all that worth it. I mean, it's helpful, because, well, we'll get to that in a moment. So it's cool. The armor pieces are kind of neat. So on the one hand, the helmet is a great idea. What it does is it pops up a map of the level, and you can actually see where the items are. And on the stage select, it'll tell you which items you have and have not gotten for that stage. That's a great feature. Except for the fact that you can only pull up that map once per stage when you first warp into the stage. And also it shows up whether you have anything you're missing or not. So that's cool. The armor's kind of neat. It reduces damage, of course. Gives you the ability to reduce damage even more periodically. It's like every other shot or something like that. You gain even more damage reduction, which is certainly necessary in a game like this. Yes, I'm hinting at building up to something, but whatever. And then we have the boots, which are actually really awesome. They give you the ability to air dash, just like in X2, but also the ability to air dash straight up, which is actually quite useful and does significantly increase what you can access. That's cool. I'm with that. Then there's the arm cannon. The Buster upgrade in this game sucks. And I'm going to describe it in 2 words, or two points, because there's only 2 points I really need to bring up. First of all, you charge up, and there's like a little charge, and then there's a big charge. That's your normal Buster, right? With this thing, you have a 3rd and a 4th charge. The 3rd charge tosses out a little bonus little thing, which doesn't do that much damage, and then the small shot. The 4th charge does the bonus thing and the big shot, okay? That sounds all right. If you manage to hit the little shot with the big shot, it'll turn into an even bigger shot and spread out. That sounds cool, right? Except for the fact that it totally doesn't and usually gets in the way of what you're aiming at. It's hard to explain, but there's this weird pause and delay in the animation, and what it hits isn't quite the same as what you're aiming at. Also, that level 2 charge shot, the initial one that you get, hits about this range, so it's about this tall of a hurt box. The other 2 charge shots have a smaller hurt box and therefore have a harder time actually hitting things. Wait, it gets worse. One of the things that Mega Man's really big on is running and shooting. As X, you can run around and shoot, and you can hold a charge and then release it while still maneuvering. That's very important, especially on some of the harder boss fights where you need to be able to dodge while shooting the enemy. If you charge to the full thing, you pause while you shoot. You just stop dead for it's only like a 1/10 of a second, but it's enough to completely interrupt your momentum and, of course, let you sit there like a duck and get killed or hurt or whatever because you can't move while you're shooting. And there's kind of a recurring trend here I'm trying to elaborate on. The game gives you 4 different mech armors which you can equip. That's kind of cool. We've had the right armor since the first game, but actually having different types of right armors and having them have slightly different movesets and stuff is kind of a cool option. Oh, you've got your basic one, which just punches. You've got the spike one, which I think is the kangaroo armor. I'm not sure. And it's the one you could charge up and shoot forwards. That's cool. You've got the hawk armor, which gives you a little bit of a hover, and missiles, which you can shoot. That's really cool. You got the frog armor, which sucks. It's the underwater only one. And this is going to segue into the bad, there are only 2 underwater sections in the game that you can use the frog armor in. 2. One of them is only like 2 screens long, and is actually faster to go through without it. And that's the problem with the right armors in a nutshell. They're cool, but extremely limited in actual use and utility. First of all, you have to unlock them in order to be able to access them, and that requires going to Blast Hornet stage first, because that's where you get the first armor, the basic Chimera armor. If you don't do that, you actually cannot unlock the other ones. And then you can't, and by the time you've unlocked the other ones, that's a minimum of 3 stages into the game if you beeline for them in order to be able to get any utility out of them whatsoever. Not exactly a great setup. You get the overall point I'm making here. You can tell that these people had ideas and concepts and wanted to push, but they absolutely did not succeed at doing so. Now, we could speculate on the whys and the wherefores. Again, there was some stuff going on behind the scenes at Capcom at this point in time, which had a trickle effect on several of their franchises, including Resident Evil, Dead Rising, and of course, Mega Man. This also is kind of why Breath of Fire kind of had its own issues, which it was kind of starting to have issues at this point in time, behind the scenes, not in terms of the quality of the games. And there's other things. The Street Fighter problem was starting to happen at this point. Capcom was beginning their downswing. It wasn't actually making their games worse, per se, because we still got some good games after this, after all. We still have the PS1 era to look forward to. But these behind-the-scenes issues would eventually lead to the PS2 era and the many, many problems therewith. Now, moving forward a little bit, these issues meant that the team that was working on this, which remember isn't really core Capcom, didn't have support. They didn't have the access or resources or time or budget necessary to actually polish this game. So what we have is, let's call it what it is, it's a beta game. I've talked about this many times before. The idea of day one patching or going in and patching a game to make it acceptable is something that's been a very controversial topic for gamers for decades. But one of the really weird, horrible, realistic truths about being able to do that is that's arguably a better thing than a worse thing. You know why? Because games being released in a buggy or unfinished state was normal, even before they had the ability to patch it. Now, I don't want to say that it's a good thing. I do think that the core issue is the game being rushed out the door. As I've said many, many times, there's such a thing as sitting on a game too long, and there's such a thing as pushing a game out too early, and you want to avoid both of those ends, right? You want to be somewhere in the middle here. But this has been a major problem since game development has existed. look up the ET on the Atari for an example of a game that was absolutely rushed out the door when it probably shouldn't have been. That's how far back that goes, is the point I'm trying to make. So, I think this game could have actually been excellent. No pun intended. If we had actually had the time to sit on it and process it and say, okay, well, hang on. Why don't we make it so we can swap the chips? So you can have one active at a time. Why don't we make it so we change around what the right armors do, so they each have a different function, and they don't have limited parts of the stage they can go to. In fact, they can go to multiple stages. What if we allow us to actually play a 0 for the whole freaking game? Now, this is the one I was sitting on. There's several things like this. But you can play a 0 in this game. That's awesome! And he does play well, and he does serve a good purpose. It is good variety, he has a slightly different moveset, and it's a way to help mitigate some of the early game difficulty, which I'll get to in just a second. The problem is you can only summon him once per stage. If he dies, he's gone for the entire game, and you can't fight bosses with him. He is so inherently limited in where you can use him and what you can use him for, and of course, if you screw up, you're done, that it actually makes something that could have been a good thing a bad thing. Hey, does that sound familiar? There's a lot of things that should have been good things that actually turned into bad things in this game. Let's talk about the level design. There are 3 pillars that Mega Man sits on: bosses, levels, weapons. The truly great Mega Mans have all 3. Looking at you, X1. But most Mega Man games actually kind of trade off which one of these they have and which one of these they don't. This one has none of the 3. So hear me out for a second. First of all, level design. This is tied into difficulty. One of the things this game did was it had you start with low health, and it had all the enemies hit much harder than usual. Even a basic bare-bones attack by the guys in the tutorial stage hits you for a decent chunk of your health. And this is true for the entire game. To really exemplify this, we actually bothered to get the Hyper Chip, aka the Golden Armor, through this playthrough. And then we fought Kaiser Sigma, which is the, by the way, spoiler, Sigma's in the game, which is the last boss of the game. Even with that on, which means we're taking 25% damage, we are mitigating 75% of all the damage we're taking, he would still hit us once for about 1/5 of our health. There are certain attacks which can two-shot you if you don't have both damage reduction upgrades, because everything in this game hits so hard. The enemies are also designed such that most of them take more shots, have more health, or take less damage. So in other words, one way or another, they take longer to kill, and a lot of enemies have a specific gimmick or mechanic that prevents them from taking damage temporarily, to ensure that they are there longer and are capable of doing damage to you longer. Neither of those things are particularly good. Hang on, it gets worse. They deliberately went out of their way to reduce the amount of item drops that are in this game. So if you noticed in X1, the itemization in item drops was actually very well designed. Especially weapon energy would drop fairly frequently to encourage you to try out weapons and to try out new things and to just experiment with the weapons, which are awesome. In this game, it's the exact opposite. You have so little weapon energy and so little health energy that you're very, very cautious and careful going through it, which might have worked if it was a different style of game, but instead it just hurts the pacing of this one, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, I know you can kill the enemies with the ice thing in order to make them drop items. That's a band-aid at best, and nothing in the game actually tells you that other than just raw experimentation and presuming it's not RNG. This is on top of the fact that the levels themselves have random pickups in them. Now that's how they band-aid this solution. They try to make it so that you have a health thing here and a health thing here, and you're just supposed to make that work. And that can work. That's the Mario Brothers approach to level design. It doesn't in this case because of the specific distribution and the fact that where they're presented doesn't always actually line up with where the enemies are or where the stage is actually directing you towards with regards to the platforming. Which is as good as any time to segue into talking about the platforming, the pacing, the actual levels themselves. There are huge swaths of levels where nothing happens. There's no interesting jumps. There's no platforming happening. You're just progressing forwards or up or forwards, and nothing's going on. And then you'll see a screen with 3 enemies, and then you move forward for another section of nothing. Then you'll fight a mini-boss, which is kind of cool, and then it takes several seconds to die because it has a full death animation. Then you'll go through a room that has nothing in it because you haven't activated the optional bosses yet, and just kind of walk through waiting for the animations to finish because you've got nothing going on here. Then you'll fight a section where there's this huge frenetic thing, and then you go to the boss, which is boring. The pacing is all over the place in this game. It actually feels like they took some of their Game Boy designs and just stretched them out to take advantage of the SNES rather than the Game Boy, which they were used to. I suppose that's a good a time as any to segue into the bosses. They tried something with the bosses. Most Mega Man bosses have actually extremely simple AI. Let's make up an example. There's a boss that has 4 attacks. The A, B, C, and D attack. We'll make it very boring here. What happens is every time that boss reaches a conclusion point in the AI script, so in other words, it's finished a jump, or it's just been hit, or it's moving around, or whatever, or it's just finished shooting. So in other words, it has to re-poll what it does next. It will randomly roll a d4, and it says, okay, I'm going to do this next. Okay, I'm going to do this next. I'm going to do this next. It's kind of random, and it's not great boss design, but it's pretty much the Mega Man standard, and it does work. It's just not good. They decided to try something here and have an if-then statement instead. Now, I don't think this was actually the first Mega Man game to have the if-then statement when it comes to boss AI. I think that was actually predated this in the classic series. But the point is, these are bad if-then statements because, for example, and I'll use a direct example this time, if you are above Crush Crawfish, he will say, okay, well, I'm going to send out my little feelers to grab you and then attack in the air. And once he finishes that statement, he notices you're up in the air. So he's going to send out his feelers and he's going to attack in the air and send out his feelers. And I just beat the Crush Crawfish boss by forcing him to do the exact same action over and over infinitely without any acknowledgement or realization that, there probably should have been some kind of interrupter, I forget what that's called in programming language, to prevent what was essentially a 30 go to 10. Not great boss AI. That isn't helped by the fact that the bosses themselves are, like I said, pretty boring. Most of them have 2, maybe 3 attacks. No less than 5 of the bosses in this game all have the exact same attack pattern of rush to one side, rush to the other. Tunnel Rhino does this. Blizzard Buffalo does this. I'm not going to list them all. We counted 5 separate bosses have this exact same attack pattern. What? So they're boring. They also hit too hard, of course. If Crush Crawfish grabs you, he can actually kill you if you fight him first, if he grabs you. Later on, he can do, I think it's 75% of your health in just one hit if you don't have the armor. So there's that problem again. But it's okay. It's all worth it for the weapons, right? So the levels aren't good, and the bosses aren't good. We've got one last pillar to knock down. The weapons in this game suck. So, okay, let's go through this. We've got the drill, which takes a moment and then flies off in front of you. Okay. If it hits anything that it is not capable of hitting, it immediately just tinks off and does nothing. You've got the ice thing, which starts here and hesitates for a moment and then heads off. If it stops, it'll actually make a little ground thing, so that's kind of cool. You've got the ability to shoot a blob of acid at someone. You've got the ability to shoot out a little gravity thing, which doesn't do anything at all to most enemies in the game. Unless they're... Basically, it's something to hurt flying enemies. That's its only real purpose. Like Blast Hornet. You've got the blast thing, which sometimes grabs them, and most of the time does nothing. Oh, but maybe the charged abilities are better, right? So what's the charged ability for the acid splash? You shoot 2 blobs of acid that bounce for a little bit. One of the greatest ideas they had in Mega Man X 1 and 2 was not just the fact that they had the different abilities for the weapons, but that they had utility. That they were something other than another flavor of shooting the enemy. This is a problem several classic games have as well. My favorite example of this is Needleman's weapon from Mega Man 3, which is just another version of your yellow lemon pellet. That's all it is. It's just, okay, cool. Can I have a real weapon? So here, we have the same general problem. Almost all these weapons just do damage. They do damage poorly. They're very easy to interrupt. Even the best weapon in the game, which is Volt Catfishes, which is the big shield thing and then the shootout. If it hits something that it doesn't do damage to, which is very easy to do, since remember, most of these enemies have those invuln things they can do, then it just stops. It's just interrupted and it goes away. And then the charged version of these things don't really add additional utility, like being able to go invulnerable, like Sting Chameleon, or like being able to shoot a giant tornado above you, like Storm Eagle, or like being able to grab things off of enemies, like shields or whatnot, or grab power-ups, like with the Silk Shot. None of that. The greatest utility you have is some of these things are required in order to get some of the power-ups. Like you need the earthquake thing from Volt Catfish to get some of the power-ups because it knocks down 2 rocks in the entire game. That's it. Lots of interesting and good ideas here. Terrible execution. The last boss, I mentioned this in brief, he hits so hard. He hits so hard. and he has a tiny window, and you can't shoot at it. Like, so it's this giant battle body, and he's got this dinky little head on it, right? You have to aim at the head, right? No, that is his weak spot, but no, you have to aim just above his head. Because what you have to do, I kid you not, is shoot behind him, and the shot actually will go behind his shoulder pads, and that will hit his head. And it's this very tiny window to hit him. Well, that's okay. He's a very cool boss. He does look cool. He has 3 attacks. One of which is to shoot a thing at you, which sometimes homes in on you. One of which is to shoot some missiles at you, which homes in on you. And one of which is to shoot a giant beam in a direction. He also occasionally floats forwards and then floats backwards. All of these things could be polished up and fixed with additional time, budget, and support, which was not given, and so we have X3. That's as good a time as I need to segue into the narrative. So, each X game tries to do more story than the previous one. X1 had a pretty bare-bones story, but it was well presented. X2 actually added, real cutscenes. X3 adds more cutscenes. And this is just going to be a trend. Every X game up to and including 8 is just going to be more story-focused. For good and for bad. What we have in X3 is some cool ideas, with some bad execution. Does this sound familiar? Dr. Doppler himself is a character who comes out of absolutely nowhere, but is apparently a Repload scientist who has come up with a way to fight the Maverick virus. Cool. I wonder if any of his notes are ever found by the ancestor to Seal in the future, who ended up working on the Mother Elf. Either way, he comes up with this total method, and he's like, hey, come here, and the Maverick virus is wiped out forever. Awesome. And then he brings together all these people to this one place, and they build this whole city called Doppeltown instead of Doppler Town. And that's the city that you fight around in this game. Then he reveals that he's evil, mwahaha, and he's working for Sigma. Okay, that's cool. Here's an interesting clarification point. Do you think, and this is a question because we don't know, I looked this up, do you think that Doppler was always infested by Sigma, or was controlled by Sigma after the fact? Now, I personally prefer the latter, because it makes more sense to me. Once again, the idea here is kind of neat. The idea is that Sigma is a virus, so that means he can infest other robots, mechanoloids, reploids, but he can't do much by himself. All he can do is control others to do for him. So what does he do? Well, he sits back and waits patiently until he sees this new brilliant scientist. He's like, aha, that's the guy. I'm going to take over that guy. And so he goes and takes over Doppler and forces him to build him this new army and all that. And one of the things they do is they churn through hundreds or thousands or millions of other Reploids, all of which are being effectively sacrificed to Dr. Doppler, in order to take their parts, take their DNA, take their stats, take their programming, in order to put it together into an absolutely ideal, like the perfect battle body is actually what they call it in this game. That's the Kaiser form I mentioned earlier. That's a cool concept. And it makes perfect sense that Sigma would use the tools at his disposal in this manner. It makes him somewhat limited, but at the same time makes him very powerful, therefore making him still a dangerous and deadly foe. That's cool. The game then ends on the note that he's actually destroyed forever. Sure, that's totally a thing. He's definitely not in the next 4 games. But I do like some of the concepts as presented. If only Bit and Byte were actually turned into characters. Why are these 2 people here? What are the Nightmare Police? Why are they working for Doppler? For what purpose were they built? Why are their names Bit and Byte, but when they're combined, they're called God Car Machine O Inari? I actually know the answer to that last question. It's because in the original Japanese version, they were called Vahuhira and something I can't pronounce, which then would more logically tie into the idea of the God Car Machine thing. So, sure, whatever. But who are these people and why are they here? No character, no explanation. Who's Mac? Why is there this rogue hunter who decides to turn on us, right? Like, that's the beginnings of an idea. That's like, if you ever go to one of those writing classes, one of the things they do is I think it's called prompted writing, where you come up with, you get a sentence and you say, this thing but that, or this is this way. So, for example, one of the hunters goes rogue. There you go. That's the prompt. And then you write a story based on that prompt. It's a cool idea, and I do recommend people do it if they want to expand in their writing concepts and creative talents. In this case, all we have is the prompt. There's these 2 twins who are both the one half of the other, which can merge into a greater form. Boy, that sounds a lot like Iris and Colonel, doesn't it? We've got this hunter who decides to go rogue for reasons unknown, probably in some way trying to fight up against X. Gosh, that sounds like Magma Dragoon, doesn't it? Like, you can see how these are just prompts. They don't do anything with them. Oh, by the way, I hope you enjoyed Dr. Kane in this game, because it's the last we'll see of him. He is referenced, not shown, referenced once after this. I double-checked this one, too. He is in the manual of X4. He's not mentioned in the game proper. He's gone. Left the narrative. No reason given. What's up with Doppler? Who is he? He'll never be mentioned again, either. And of course, at the end, they have the obvious mistranslation that in order to secure the future, X must destroy Zero. What that actually meant is it was likely that the two would have to fight in the future. That was the original translation. There's actually several mistranslation issues in this game, which I don't know at this point. This was also an era in which Capcom was having weird things when it came to their American audience. Remember, this is the era that not only gave us Mega Man 6, which almost didn't even come out in the States, but also Mega Man 8 and Mega Man X4. So that's cool. And I am left disappointed. I'm looking over here to the side because this is where my copy is. I really do feel like this could be an excellent game. And someone mentioned this in chat, that if we had continued forward with the proper remake reboots with the Maverick Hunter series, it would have been fascinating to see what they could take and do with X3, because I think there's a lot of potential here. I'll just add that to the bucket list, right, of the many, many games I need to proper remake someday. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts. We will be trying X4 tomorrow, aka The Golden Child, which everyone loves, so I'm nervous as hell about that one. Oh, favorite song. Sorry, almost forgot. I actually really like Gravity Beetle's song. It's among my favorite Mega Man songs ever. Gravity Beetle stage. It's awesome. I love it. They really wanted to go into the grunge guitar kind of a vibe for this overall soundtrack, and I do think it works for the tone they're going for. As usual, I would love to hear what your favorite song is, if, of course, you have one. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.